The LEAP Foundation proudly presents the Meet the Mentor podcast with Dr. Bill Dorfman. Dr. Bill is a TV host, New York Times best-selling author, two-time Guinness World Book record holder, fitness guru, celebrity cosmetic dentist, and philanthropist who founded the LEAP Foundation. Here's Dr. Bill.
Hey, Dr. Bill, Happy New Year. Man, there's no way that 2021 can't beat 2020. I mean, we canceled the Olympics. We got COVID. Bye-bye Trump. I mean, crazy year. If you had told me in 2020 that it was going to look the way it looked, that's like a sci-fi horror movie. But thank goodness we are on the mend. Yesterday, I got my whole family vaccinated, my ex-wife, all my daughters, I'm vaccinated, my whole staff at my office is vaccinated. Get vaccinated as quickly as you can. The faster we all get vaccinated, the faster this thing goes away and the faster we can return to our normal lives. So please do them. They are safe and it's so critical. LEAP, we are going to plan to do this live and virtually. So if you want to sign up for LEAP now, you can. The dates will be July 18th to the 24th at UCLA. If we have to pivot and make it all virtual again, we will, but we're hoping that we'll have both programs running concurrently. What is LEAP? If you've never ever heard of LEAP, shame on you, but if you haven't, LEAP is a motivational leadership program for high school and college students where we teach kids 15 to 25 plus the skills that they need to be successful in life. And we do it by bringing in amazing, successful mentors who share the secrets of their success with these students and tell them what it took for them to become successful. In the past, we've had Mark Wahlberg, Anthony Hopkins, Kathy Bates, Paula Abdul, Jason Alexander from Friends. We've had Michael Strahan, Apollo Ono, the most decorated Winter Olympian in history, Chris Voss, the New York Times bestselling author of Never Split the Difference, the FBI negotiator, Tracy Bregman, my dear sweet friend who's been on The Young and the Restless since she was a teenager. I mean, amazing people, pretty much all of Pentatonics. And it's a really fascinating program. The program culminates on Friday with something we call a mentor workshop, which is basically an opportunity for students to sit and talk to mentors live. And our speaker today has participated in the 2019 program, where they really get to pick these people's brains and ask them what it is that really helped them become successful. What were the obstacles that they had to overcome to become successful, and how'd they do it? The difference between our podcast, Meet the Mentor, and a lot of the other ones out there is I'm going to put our speaker on the spot. I'm going to ask Jeffrey to really give you guys a game plan for what you need to do if you'd like to pursue a career doing what he does and that he is so good at doing. So why do we do this Meet the Mentor podcast? Well, we've interviewed all these amazing people, and the amount of knowledge and the things that they have to say is so riveting that I thought, I don't want it to just be a LEAP experience. So, this podcast has exploded. We're, I think, in the top 100 in over 50 countries worldwide. We were number 1 in Yemen, number 2 in Iceland, number 3 in Finland. I mean, it's crazy, but we get great listeners and people love to hear these stories. And so without further ado, I am going to introduce you to Jeffrey. This is Jeffrey Masters. He actually, like I said, participated at LEAP in the 2019 program as a mentor in our mentor workshop on Friday. He is an on-air host, writer, and producer. He's the director of podcasts at Pride Media. He's the host and creator of the popular interview podcast. It's such a great title, LGBTQ&A. I love it. Produced by The Advocate magazine and GLAAD. The podcast has been recommended by the New York Times and has featured interviews with Pete Buttigieg, Laverne Cox, Roxane Gay, and many, many more. Jeff has been doing this podcast for nearly 5 years now, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to Jeffrey. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming to LEAP in person and for agreeing to do this. So let's just jump right into this. If you are a student right now and you think you have it in you to actually do a podcast, what do? Like, what's the first thing you should do?
Okay, so the first thing you need to do is actually listen to podcasts, right? As podcasts are trendy now, and everyone I work with says, "Oh, I want to start a podcast," and I say, "Like, what kind of podcast do you want it to be?" And they say, "I don't know." And I say start there, just because there's so many different types, there's so many different genres, and you need to know where you fit in the market, and also what else is out there that already might be the exact podcast that you have. Does that make sense? Is that too basic to start with?
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of your favorites? Like, I know I draw on, I love How I Built This with Guy Raz. I love the masterclass is amazing. What are some of the ones that inspire you that you think students should listen to?
Yeah.
Besides yours, by the way.
Right. Mine is, of course, the best podcast of all time. That's a given. But, I think you need to listen to the just like the stalwarts, like the biggest ones that everyone's listening to, just so you can be a part of the conversation. And that shows like The Daily from the New York Times. Still Processing from the New York Times is amazing. That's a culture show by two culture writers. Today Explained from Vox, VOX. Vox is really taking over the podcast market, really interesting way. They had a podcast called Land of Giants, which is about how like Netflix has taken over the world. The second season was Amazon, how that's kind of taken over the world. And then I listen, because I host an interview podcast, I listen to a ton of other interview podcasts. Alec Baldwin is a shockingly great interviewer. Katie Couric, of course, we know that. How I Built This with Guy Raz, that is a interview podcast kind of that is pointed towards like the business niche, like how do you make it in a field. And I bring that up because now there's over 1 million podcasts. Right now, you really need to find your niche. And I think that is what, and really make it, I think, when you're starting out, as specific as possible. Just because if you are 22 years old and you're into politics and say, I want to have a politics podcast, my question is like, why should I listen to your podcast when there's like ex-Obama White House employees that have a podcast? When there are like the best minds on TV having a podcast, like why would I want to listen to yours? And so I think that it's really important to have, when you're starting out, as like small of a niche as possible, and then you branch out.
Okay, so step one, listen to other podcasts. I agree. Before we go to step two, let's talk about you for a second. You have a very unique niche, and this niche has enabled you to become a consultant for Google, for a lot of big companies. Let's talk about that. And how you capitalize on that. Yesterday when we spoke in our little pre-interview, I mentioned that at LEAP, what I love to teach students is, number one, don't wait for opportunities in life, make them. And number two, when you do get an opportunity, don't take it, master it. So you and I spent a little bit of time talking about how to master that. So let's talk about your niche and then some of the other possibilities that have kind of branched off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So LGBTQ&A, that's Q&A with an ampersand, is my podcast. And it is, broadly an LGBTQ interview show. So I talk to famous actors, authors, entertainers, everything about their field and how they got to where they are today, kind of through this queer lens. And it sounds dumb, but like I didn't invent this idea of just interviewing queer and trans people, right? But 5 years ago, the market was so small that there was not a big queer interview podcast. And so there was this hole in the market. I had the expertise and that experience. And so I was like, I can really do this well. And so, I'd been studying long form interviews before. I think that one of the things that I'm really proud of is people say like what great questions I ask. And that's not just because I'm great at improving. I don't just come up with questions while we're talking. I do like a shit ton of research beforehand, and I've studied the greats. Terry Gross at Fresh Air, one of the best things I ever did was buy her book. It's a book of transcriptions of interviews. And then when you're reading that, you can see exactly the kinds of questions she asks, and then also the follow-up questions. And then she asks for examples. And so things like that just, I think, make you, I didn't want to have a good podcast. I want to have a great podcast. And like 5 years later.
But as a result of your podcast, you have become kind of an authority. Like if somebody wants to find a famous dentist in America to back a product, they pretty much need me. Like there aren't, you know what I mean? So you become like the go-to guy, like, talk about some of the things that have happened where you've been called in as a consultant and why, you have the credence to do that.
Yeah. So from the podcast, it's allowed me to write articles for big websites. I consult with a lot of brands about Pride Month and how to market to the queer community. For example, Amazon had this really massive virtual Pride event. I helped them do some programming with that. I helped them pull out the kind of queer content that was on their website that they needed to feature. And I think that everyone thinks that everything that they know, that everyone else knows, if that makes sense. But I was pointing out to Amazon that they had shows like The Watermelon Woman, which is by Cheryl Dunye. She's the first Black lesbian to direct a feature film. It's the first movie about a Black lesbian. And that was on their service, and it's tagged as special interests. And so they're like, well, how do you know that we even have this movie on our service? And it's like, well, that's my field. That's my expertise. And so whereas to me, I think that is just kind of like something everyone knows, but what?
I wanted to grab something. Go on.
Okay. But like working with brands like that, I consulted with a ton of companies on how to like market to us without just putting a rainbow on something. And really just making sure that we're showing like the full breadth of the community. We oftentimes brands say we support queer and trans people, but it's kind of at a cosmetic level. It's not structural diversity, it's like cosmetic. And that really, I find frustrating.
Yeah, so here's the thing though. Your podcast is part of a puzzle that makes you a quote unquote expert. That's one thing. When I was approached to do my book, $1 Billion Smile, I said to the editor, I don't want to write a book. I want to write a New York Times bestseller. And they laugh. They go, why? I go, I don't care about writing a book. Like, you don't make money on a book. But if I write a New York Times bestseller, I can book Ellen and Rosie and The Tonight Show. And I did all those, So I think that a lot of times you have to think bigger, and if you can find a niche, let's say, you're, I don't know, in the airplanes and you become like the expert on flying planes or whatever your field is, you need to be the best. You need to be the go-to man or the go-to woman, that people are going to think about. So, I agree with you. Number one, figure out what your niche is, listen to podcasts. Number two, what happens next?
Well, I think that it's really important to have a partnership. Well, I'll say soon. I'll get to that in a second. When you're starting out, I think that everyone is afraid. They're trying to figure out how do I figure out how to do this? The only way you figure out how to do it is by doing it, right? Then you're never going to figure out podcasting and then make a podcast. You have to figure it out while you're making a podcast. And so I have this really successful podcast that everyone knows about. What people don't know is that I had 3 to 4 other ones that were like utter crap earlier than this. And that's where I worked out my kinks. And I think it's really important to like work out your kinks, not in the public eye. Because now when I make a mistake, thousands and thousands of people hear it. And so I don't make mistakes anymore, but I absolutely did. So what I'm trying to say is like, just start, you will figure it out along the way. And then I mentioned partnerships. I think it's really important because nowadays you cannot grow an audience with a podcast. You can only leverage an existing podcast. That has really been a big change in the market. And so I interview celebrities and I leverage their audiences because then they promote to their own. If you're 20 years old in college, you're not going to book a celebrity. But the other thing that's not true. You're not going to book as big as celebrities, let's say, as I've interviewed. But what you do have access to is these partnerships. Like I've partnered with The Advocate magazine, the oldest queer magazine in the world. If you're in college, you can partner with like a student organization, maybe the larger college on its own, just even a church or a synagogue, and like leveraging these smaller communities, but that for like seasons at a time to like grow off other people's audiences is really important when you're starting out.
I think that's awesome. And also, if you are in school, like what kinds of classes would you take? I mean, obviously, I think things like taking, theater or drama or debate, things like that, where you're actually speaking and things like that would be helpful. But what kinds of things did you do to prepare? I mean, I know that when ABC put me on Extreme Makeover, the dentistry I had, the acting I didn't. Well, I stunk. Stunk. On the first few episodes, they should have fired me. It was so incredibly painful to watch. But instead of stinking, what I did is I watched myself and I saw how bad I was, and I did something about it. I took acting classes, hosting classes, teleprompting classes. I worked with the woman who trained the kids on American Idol to do interviews and things like that.
So I think that is the key, that you thought you were bad, but you went back and you watched it anyways. I think nobody really likes the sound of their own voice. The vast majority of people can't stand to hear themselves talk. And so they never listen to any audio of themselves. And so, there's many classes are great, many classes are horrible, but the best class you control over is like recording yourself, either it's a podcast or just do otherwise, and listening back. I think that I've done this for 5 years. I've done 200 interviews. The early interviews, if you go back and listen to them, like, please don't. First of all, they're not at the quality that I think is appropriate now. But hearing the host, me, there's a lot of nervous laughter. There's a lot of likes. And now I was saying like every 5 words, and now I say like every 7 to 10. It's progress, But I think that learning how to talk on mic is such an important skill that is like so much harder than it sounds. I think of the podcasting as YouTube. You can take a video on your phone and upload it to YouTube. Or you can be Martin Scorsese and shoot a gorgeous feature film and also upload that to YouTube. The quality level is all across the map. And just because you can turn on a microphone and record yourself and upload that as a podcast, it doesn't mean it's going to be good. It took me so long to learn how to talk on mic. And one of the biggest things I did, it's one, it's listening to yourself back, and 2, it's editing. Most young podcasters just will record and upload that, but you're never going to get better, and you're going to lose the audience's attention too. And so hearing back, I became a great editor for audio, and that made me an even better host, because then I'm editing while I'm talking, which makes it easier for the editors going forward.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I think that those are all really, really helpful. So let's say you've gotten to a point where, you've listened to podcasts, you've created a niche, you've got this genius idea, you go out, you find, Jerry Seinfeld agrees to do an interview with you, and you're excited, and you're going to do your podcast, and, you go ahead and you record it. Now what? Like, how do you get people to listen to it? Where do you put it? I mean, I know for me, I work with a company that actually helps produce my podcast and puts it out to the public. But let's say you're a student and you don't really have a big budget, where do you go with that?
So I can answer this question with like 3 to 4 answers, but the truth is there's not like one magic pill, right? And if there was, I would be taking the pill. But I think that's why I recommend partnering with other organizations, because a lot of them have email lists and then they can blast it out to their email subscribers. If you interview Jerry Seinfeld, hopefully he will then, tweet it out to all of his followers on social media there. If you want to get more clever, make sure that in the interview you have like some sort of breaking news or new to people, and then you can pull that clip out and email it to all the outlets around, and hopefully then that gets picked up and generated that way. I had an interview with Lily Reinhardt, who's a star on a CW show, Riverdale. She's 26 million followers on Instagram. And so that interview got picked up by every single outlook, from Page 6 to Perez Hilton to PopSugar, E! News. Everyone wrote about this interview. And it wasn't because I posted it on iTunes and let it sit there. I did a transcription and then I copy and pasted the newsy bits and I emailed each editor individually. I just went down my list, and luckily I've been in LA long enough that I have these personal connections. So it's like, hey friend, how are you? But for other people, I just, Googled it and sent them a cold email. And because I'm helping them do their job, I'm giving them a newsy bit with a famous celebrity, they write about it.
I think that's awesome. But how do you even get in the podcast store? What do you do to do that? I don't even know, because I had people do it for me. I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, I'm envious of you, first of all. No, but I mean, and that's kind of the easy part. There's a ton of services. Megaphone is kind of the most popular one. Spotify bought them this year. I've everything uploaded through there. And there's for people just starting out, I don't think you need something that's like the Ferrari. You can just have the Volvo. And that's Buzzsprout, I think, is the company. I've used them in many years. There's many options. Megaphone is amazing because once you start selling advertising, it's so easy to insert those ads. But the truth is that for everybody starting out, their first podcast is not going to make money. It's not going to make money for years at a time. I told you this, but it was 2.5 years into making my podcast when I started selling advertising. And after 2.5 years of work, I got a paycheck for $120. I don't do this for money. Well, now it's my full-time job, but I kind of struck lightning because I created a podcast and then brought it to this existing magazine. And that is only because of, to be honest, the quality of the podcast and that it gained notoriety, but that is not something that happens on the regular. These magazines would rather just create their own podcast.
Yeah, and I think that's a really cool thing. So you kind of brought us up to the point where, you have an idea, you create a niche, you start to study, you learn, you practice, you create this podcast. But now comes the part that I think is super exciting. How do you monetize it? And one of the things that we talked about yesterday is kind of this perception of you becoming an expert in your field. And one of the things that I did, and I'll talk about it now because I think this is at a point where a lot of podcasts really need to go, and maybe they're too scared to venture out, or they don't want to make the investment or whatnot. But when I started Instagram about 2.5 years ago, I had no followers, and I was kind of embarrassed, and I'm here I am, one of the most famous dentists in the world with no followers. So what I did was I hired a team of people to help me grow my Instagram organically and help me create better content. And what I did is exactly what you said. I looked at the 10 top dentists on Instagram to see what they were doing and did it better. I'm the only dentist in the world now with over 1 million followers on Instagram, and that's because I copied genius. I looked at what these other dentists were doing, and I made my content better and better and better. And I worked with teams of people that helped me optimize my social media presence and get me more and more and more organic followers. And then I started getting great deals from different brands, to promote Oral-B and their toothbrush, the IO toothbrush, and things like that. So, there are ways that you can actually generate revenue, either from your podcast. And, the big question I know people always ask you is when can you sell ads? And what's the answer?
Never. I mean, I think the latest numbers I saw were that only 1% of podcasts have more than 30,000 downloads per episode. So if you're in the 1%, you can do it, but if not, it's not going to ever pay your rent. But what I've done is made money through indirect routes. I told you about consulting with companies like Amazon, writing articles or cover stories for magazines. I've also got, speaking fees for like moderating panels or sitting on panels, but also it has just branded me as you said, an expert. I now have, representation for a book that I'm writing, and I never would have gotten that without a successful podcast. And so I'm not getting, that $120 check from advertising anymore, but I am like getting this book deal. And so everything is like roundabout in those ways for sure.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. And I'll tell you something, if you're listening to this podcast and you do everything that Jeffrey says, and you get to a point where you're really at that tipping point, the next thing is you get an agent. And the reason you want an agent is because they can negotiate for you in ways that you have no idea. So I'm going to share a funny little anecdotal story with you. But back in the day, when we sold Discus Dental to Philips, they had a toothbrush that they wanted me to be a spokesperson for. So they called my agent and they said, we'd like Dr. Bill to do this satellite media tour and launch this product and And how much is it going to be? And she said, 300,000. And they're like, what? For one day? She goes, yeah. And they said, we could get, and they named this very, very famous celebrity. We could get this famous celebrity for $300,000. She goes, really? Who do you think people are going to buy a toothbrush from? An alcoholic in rehab or Dr. Bill the dentist? And they're like, So she got me not 300,000, but a pretty nice chunk of change that I would have never in my life imagined I could get. So, it's all about taking something, growing it, and maximizing it. I'm getting a text message from a very famous woman in the UK who's married to a famous soccer player there. So anyhow, you need to really take your brand and explode it. And I think that, you are on the cusp of doing that. And I'm super excited to see where you're going to go with this. And I'm here for you, Jeffrey. I would love to be a mentor for you and help you, because I think that what you're doing is so valuable and you're so good at it. I've listened to your podcast and you are great. And, I think you're like right about to hit that next level. And I'm super excited to see that. Personally,
well, I hope that's true. Thank you.
Personally, what's next for you?
I am trying to. So for this new season of my show, I've done over 200 interviews. I'm really only interested in interviewing people anymore that I'm like so freaking excited to talk to. So I only want like the biggest people in the world, or I love historical people. I interviewed somebody yesterday who was at Stonewall. I want the bigger and better people, and I just want to keep growing this thing. And I want to write my book. I want to see what's next, for sure.
That's awesome. And if students want to contact you, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, they can find me on social media at Jeff Masters 1. There's links to my website in there and contact forms. I talk to students honestly every month about how to launch a podcast, or if they have a podcast, how to make it better. I'm happy to do that as well. But yeah, on social media is the easiest way to connect with me.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much. And again, if you are a student or have a student or know a student, 15 to 25, please sign up for LEAP. You can sign up for the virtual or the live program. Go to www.leapfoundation.com. And thank you for listening to Meet the Mentor. I'm Dr. Bill. Over and out.
To learn more about the LEAP Foundation, go to leapfoundation.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Leap Foundation or on Instagram at Leap Foundation. Listen to the Meet the Mentor podcast with Dr. Bill Dorfman on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.